On today's video, we're going to do a couple of follow-ups on one of the craziest trims we've seen on this channel in quite some time. Welcome back to Nate the Hoof Guy. Now on that initial trim, I knew right off that we had problems when I saw this heel bulb, and once we got into it, well, it didn't disappoint. So what began as a small defect in that white line ultimately caused this entire sole to separate. The pressure built up inside there and then released out the top, creating a double sole or a false sole situation. We found a bunch of rocks and debris and stuff up underneath that false sole, and then we trimmed all of the loose horn away that we could before we thoroughly washed it with chlorhexidine. The corium underneath did have some pockets of dermatitis, so we wrapped that with some salicylic acid, and we put a block on that other claw before letting her go. You can see she's still a little uncomfortable at this point. Now we are 4 weeks later, taking a look to see what we got. You can see there's still some glue there, but that block is gone. So whenever you see a block missing on a recheck, you got to start asking yourself some questions as to what happened. Where did that block go and why did it come off? You can see we've still got glue there holding it on. You can see if you look close, some black marks in that glue. That's actually the plastic from that block where it gotten pulled away from that. And you're going to see later on in the next recheck exactly why this block came off on this one. Now onto the knife work. We'll clean this hoof up even more to see how we did. Now you'll notice I said this was the 4-week recheck. Typically on this farm, I'm there every 2 weeks. I'm going to check this at the 2-week interval. However, I was on vacation, so I didn't get to recheck it at that 2-week interval. I had to be at the 4-week check. And luckily for her, she's actually improving quite well. You can see we've got new sole across that whole bottom. The only problem area is right here. This particular area is the site of that initial lesion that caused the sole to separate and caused this whole problem. What probably happened here is there's some dermatitis on that lesion. There was at the time. Probably didn't get that all cleaned up, and that's why that corium wasn't able to begin to produce hoof horn in that particular area. You'll notice all the areas around that, good solid hoof horn, but that particular spot is still open. You'll see it better once we get it all cleaned out. Now she did lose her original block, so we're going to get this claw prepped and put a brand new block on that claw. Hopefully she can keep this one around until her next recheck. As I mentioned earlier, there is good solid hoof horn throughout this whole sole. The only problem area is over here in this white line. You can see that here. That's the area we've got to get cleaned up. The key part here is making sure that we get this all the way notched out. Make sure that we follow that till the end of that crack. Otherwise, we might have pockets in there that we can't get thoroughly cleaned out, in which case that dermatitis could hide in there and continue to cause this problem. So we make sure we notch that out. That way we can get that thoroughly cleaned. And then once again, we're going to pat it dry and we're going to get another salicylic acid wrap on this. And then we're going to follow up in a couple weeks and see how we did. Well, she is certainly walking much better, but let's see if we can get this all finished up. Here we are, 2 weeks later, and guess what? Look at that block. She has destroyed that block once again, and that's why that block came off on the first trim. She's just really hard on blocks. You'll notice that with some cows. Sometimes you'll put a block on, it'll last 6 weeks and look perfect. And other times, in just 2 weeks, this cow's managed to destroy that rubber block. Here we can get our first looks at that lesion, and it's looking pretty good. I don't see any openness yet, but we're going to get it trimmed up, and we'll find out for sure. My goal here is not to remove a lot of hoof material. It's just to make sure that there is no openness left to this and that that crack in that white line has terminated. We don't want that to remain because it could continue to further work up that wall. So we want to trim that all the way out and make sure that the sole is completely intact, that there's no open areas there. That's telling us then that that sole is going to continue to grow the way it's supposed to, and that sole will be nice and thick. Taking a closer look at this area, we can see there's no corium exposed anymore. We've got a nice layer of hoof horn there, which is perfect. That's exactly what we want. We've got good sole thickness here, so she doesn't need a block. This foot can go down. We're going to let her out. We're going to do some comparisons here of when we first let her out of that chute from that first trim all the way down through the end now. Here she is on that first trim. Not too sure of herself. Obviously, that foot was bothering her. The second trim, she's walking much better, but there was still a lesion there. And now here, fully healed. Thanks for watching, guys.